I think we are live now. So good evening to all the participants present here for the last session of today's program, which is a special talk by Professor Scott DeLancey. And today our chair is Professor K.H. Dhiren Singha. He is a professor from the Department of Linguistics, Assam University, Silchar. So I'd like to request Professor Singha to kindly chair the session and announce it open.
Thank you, Manali. Good evening, all. And good morning to our Scott sir.
Good morning.
Yes, I welcome our plenary speaker, Professor Scott, and all the participants of ICTiBLANEI. So today we have first plenary talk of the International Conference of Tibeto-Burman Linguistics Association of Northeast India. And as you all know, Professor Scott DeLancey, he has done excellent research work on Tibeto-Burman languages of South Asia. And Professor Scott is very familiar to the Northeast Indian universities because he visited almost all the universities of Northeast India. We are thankful to Professor Scott for his wonderful contribution in the field of TB linguistics, and we learn a lot from him. So being a teacher, he always loved the students and he always had the students. And we are really grateful to him for his contribution. And without delaying, so I take the opportunity to invite Professor Scott DeLancey to deliver his lecture or talk. He will be speaking on where grammar comes from grammaticalization of the Copula Knee in Tibeto-Burman. And Sir, Scott, sir, over to you. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to need to be able to share my screen here. Okay. Well, let me see. What do you see now? I'm a little confused about what I'm doing.
Yeah,
we see slide one.
We can see, sir. We can see.
Yeah, we can see, but it needs to be in full screen.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. How's that?
Yeah, it's fine.
Yes,
It's
sir.
fine.
Yes, fine.
Okay. So, as the title says, where grammar comes from, this is just an illustration. I've been working on reconstructing this particular copula simply because it shows up as many other kinds of morpheme in various languages. So I'm going to show you first, say just a little bit about how copulas work in Tibeto-Burman languages, and then give you a little bit of comparative evidence for this one particular copula, ni. But most of the paper, I'm going to be showing you how this ni has turned into other things. In many languages, it becomes a sentence final particle that marks evidential categories or assertion or various other things that nowadays linguists call stance. Then there's a further step of grammaticalization where it becomes a topic marker or focus marker, one of those little things that all Tibeto-Burman languages have that come after a noun phrase. We'll look at some examples of that. And then finally, this knee has done some strange and mysterious things in various languages, particularly Kiranti, but some others as well. It seems to have a unusual connection with negation. And I will show you some examples, and then we'll talk about why that actually is not that surprising and follows directly from some basic facts about Tibeto-Burman grammar. So, let me see how I do this. Copulas in Tibeto-Burman languages. One of the things we notice if we compare, say, Tibeto-Burman with Indo-European, if we look at the Indo-European languages, we can reconstruct 3 or 4 copulas to the proto-language, and we see reflexes of them all over the place in modern languages. If we look at Trans-Himalayan or Sino-Tibetan languages, it seems like sometimes every language or every group has its own copulas, and they're different from one language to the next. And what this tells us is that in Tibeto-Burman languages, it's common for a language to lose an old copula and develop a new one. So if we look just, for example, at the Kiranti languages, and we see that it's not quite true that every language has its own copula, but if we look, there's at least 4 or 5 different copula roots in those 6 languages. So we have to assume that some of them have invented new copulas and that these all don't go back to Proto-Kiranti. Now, syntactically speaking, in most Tibeto-Burman languages, Tibetan is an exception because the copulas do extra work. But in pretty much all of the Tibeto-Burman languages that are represented among the participants in this conference, in an affirmative statement, if you're saying something like Krishna is a teacher, you will not use a copula, right? The copula is, the equational copula is used only for contrast or emphasis. So in Boro, if I want to say he's a teacher, that's Yusase Purungiri, and we don't need any copula. And if I put the copula in, if I say Purungiri Nongo, I am contradicting you or correcting somebody's mistaken prior belief. I indicate that by, in English translation, by putting the is in italics, meaning that it's pronounced with contrastive stress. Which is how we do this in English. This is going to be important later. I'm going to keep coming back to this point that in a Tibeto-Burman language, you usually don't use the equational copula in an affirmative sentence. You need it in a negative sentence, but in an affirmative sentence, you only use it for contrast. So let's move on from here. Okay, I just said that, so I don't have to read that again. So now let's look at this particular copula. So I've already told you this much, but there are across the Tibeto-Burman languages, there are a few roots that seem to keep coming up over and over. There's one something like Y or Way, and a couple of others. The one that we are interested in is this Ni, which I say we can reconstruct for Proto-Trans-Himalayan. Well, let me prove that for you. First, just really briefly, this is the classification of Tibeto-Burman languages that I'm using, where there are 3 major branches. The Eastern, which is most of the languages in China, Western, which is most of the languages in Nepal and Northwest India, and Central, which includes most of the languages of Northern Myanmar and Northeast India. This is controversial, but it will do for our purposes. Okay. I can find ni as a copula only in a few of these languages, but they are languages that are spread all across the family. They're not just in one corner. So it's very clear that ni is the copula for all the West Himalayan group. For Kiranti, we'll talk about that again in a minute. For Bodogaro, for South Central, that is what we're now calling what used to be called Kukichin. And then in a couple of Eastern groups. Now, when I say it's clearly attested for example, in South Central, well, if we look at the South Central languages, it's only there in some of them. So the Monsang copula is not ni, it's ka. But we will see later on that there are traces of ni left in other parts of the Monsang paradigm. But this is enough evidence to tell us that ni goes back to Proto-South Central. And when we add all that together, that gives us enough evidence to argue that we have to reconstruct this for Proto-Sino-Tibetan, Proto-Trans-Himalayan. It would be nice if we had more evidence. And of course, for Tibeto-Burmanists who don't agree with me about the three major branches, this maybe is less convincing. But we're going to see now, as we look at how ni has grammaticalized, that there are many other morphemes in Tibeto-Burman languages, which are not copulas, but which nevertheless are evidence for this ni. That's what I just said again. I get ahead of myself, as you can see with these slideshows. Okay, so we are going to find forms that clearly go back to this ni as sentence final particles, as information structure markers, and even in Kiranti as a negative marker, which is very strange, but we will see that it is actually kind of a natural development. So first, let's look at where we get sentence final particles from. Now, remember what I said a little while ago about copulas in Tibeto-Burman languages, that in an affirmative sentence, you typically only use the copula for emphasis or for contrast or for contradiction, right? If I say, Krishna is a teacher, and all I want to do is tell you that Krishna is a teacher, we don't need a copula. If the copula is there, that's a situation where you've been telling me that, no, he's not a teacher, and I'm saying, you're wrong, yes, he is. Okay, so I think I clipped these examples a long time ago out of Dr. Longmalai's dissertation. But the point simply is that Dimasa works exactly the same as Bodo in this respect, and is exactly the same as all the other Tibeto-Burman languages, right? If I say Ibusing Nigar, that's the normal way to say that thing there is our car, those are the same. And if I put in the copula nidu, and notice, no, that's not what I wanted to do. Notice that we have our copula ni here in Dimasa, even though we don't see it in Bodo. Okay, this copula here is giving you some extra information, and it's giving you potentially some information about that is the speaker's view of where this information stands in the world, right? So I put the ni in there, I'm emphasizing that you are wrong, I'm right, or whatever the context is here. Okay, now this is true in every language. And by that I mean, we find some languages where the ni no longer is the ordinary copula. it's now used only to give this special contrastive sense. So in Mete, for example, Chelea says, essentially what she's saying here is that you can stick ni on all kinds of sentences, even sentences that aren't equational copula sentences, just to indicate, yes, this is true and I know it. So basically what has happened here is we start with a copula that has the meaning of a copula, but that you only use when you are particularly asserting your own personal knowledge of this in contrast to something else. And that is so useful that you can then start putting that on other sentences that even aren't copula sentences. You just stick at the end to say, yeah, I know this. Anybody who thinks differently is wrong. I'm the one who's right here. So here are some examples from Chelea's grammar. So in number 2, if you just say, say a sentence without the ni, you're just saying the sentence. Yeah, where's that cloth? Oh, I threw it out. In the first one, there's some kind of more involvement of the speaker on this. I don't know exactly what will be the context for this. The point we need to look at is that you can stick this copula on the end where it's not doing the work of a copula, it's doing the work of a sentence final particle, telling you the speaker's attitude toward what's happening. Now in Dai Chin, a Kukichin language from Myanmar, there is one true copula, ni, which Helga Sohartman said is now nearly completely grammaticalized and occurs most frequently as an emphatic particle. So if we think of Dimasa as the starting point, Mete has moved one step farther and is now using ni as a sentence final particle as well as a copula. By Dai, she's saying it occurs most frequently as an emphatic particle, so it's moving further along the grammaticalization scale. It's less of a copula and more of a stance marker. And here she gives some examples. So the first one is just a copula sentence, right? I assume that if I just say ke kpami, that just means I'm a man. I'm not sure why anybody would be questioning it, but anyway, but you put in the ni and now you're contradicting something someone else has suggested previously. And then again, as in Mete, we can put this on all kinds of sentences simply to emphasize the speaker's, what do I want to say here, commitment to the truth of this proposition. And so, as I said, we already said, everywhere we find the ni, it has this extra function of marking assertion. Then we find languages where that's the only function it has left. For example, there's a language Munya in Sichuan. It's a Chang'ek language. And as Bai, the author of the grammar, puts it, he calls this an egophoric marker, not a copula, because it has moved so far to being a stance marker by now that it really doesn't have the copula function anymore. What it does is to indicate that the information provided by the speaker is not shared by the addressee. Pretty much the same function we've been talking about, except here it's moved a little farther. If we go back to the Dimasa example, that is our car. The most likely context you would think of for that is where I believe that you think something different and I'm telling you you're wrong. At this point in Bai, it doesn't really have anything to do with the addressee's attitude. This is simply emphasizing that this is my point of view as opposed to some other kind of fact. So here's just an example from Munya. And in this case, what is the Ni doing? It's not contradicting anything. The speaker here is telling you a story you didn't know about. What the Ni is doing is saying, this is something I know. This is information that I tell you from my experience. You wouldn't have any way of knowing this if I weren't here to tell you. But you can see how that develops step by step from something like a simple copula that we saw in Dimasa. There's a Kiranti language, Chintang, that has what in the grammar is called a sentence final emphatic Ni. Now here, the meaning has moved a little bit farther. This isn't saying, I know this, so I can tell you. This is now saying, everybody knows this, so I can tell you. There's an example. Once again, I don't really know a lot of context for this. Then in Kham, that's another language of Nepal. Once again, the Ni has kind of been diluted even more. In Waters' description of Kham, the Ni really is just there at the end, just kind of to say, yeah, this is true. So it's even more weakened. It's now no longer saying anything about what you know. It's now no longer even emphasizing that this is what I know. It's now no longer really even pointing out that you might not know this. It's really just ending a sentence, saying, yeah, this is a fact. But still, I think this is absolutely recognizably our same Ni. There isn't any other source for it. There isn't any place else for it to have come from. And we can see this natural development by which we start out with a copula and end up with just this little particle that ends up at the ends of sentences where copulas used to be. All right. But still, this is really only the first step in the kind of development that we see. So all Tibeto-Burman languages, as far as I know, have what I'm calling information structure markers. And this is kind of a new term. There isn't really a dedicated general term for this category. People talk about topic markers and focus markers and emphatic markers and contrastive markers and additive markers. So in fact, Krishna Bodo just published, or it's just about to come out, I don't know, in the current issue of Linguistics of the Tibeto-Burman area, has a paper about these in Bodo, which has a bunch of them. I feel the need for a general term for the category. So there is a morphosyntactic category in any Tibeto-Burman language. The way the noun phrase works, you have your noun phrase with whatever modifiers or whatever. You have a case postposition after that if you need one. And then if you need one, you have one of these information structure markers following the case marker. And what these do is tell you, this is the one I've been talking about, or this is not the one I've been talking about, or I'm adding this on to what we've been talking about, or what have you. And in a truly surprising number of languages, one of these ISMs, most Tibeto-Burman languages have 2 or 3, some have 4 or 5. Bodo so far is the champion as far as I know, but that might only be because we've looked the most deeply in it. But in many of these languages, one of them, usually either the contrast marker or the additive marker, has the form ni. So in classical Tibetan, and this is a nice example which shows the commonest function of this. So we're looking at this ni down here, and I've glossed it as topic only because some linguists writing about Tibetan call it a topic marker. I don't think that's the right term for it, but this is a nice example that shows the commonest way that it's used. So this is from an old Jataka tale, one of the stories about one of the former lives of the Buddha. And in this story, the Buddha in one of his early lives was born as a giant bird. And he lived with a young man and was the young man's faithful bird. And the bird was big enough, the boy could get on his back and they would fly around and see the sights. And that's our sentence A here. So they would fly off to see the sights. The bird, he would leave the bird in the tree, and then the boy, contrast, would go off to see the sights. So what this ni is doing is saying, okay, up to this point, we've got a boy and a bird together, and they show up and they stop in the tree, and then they separate and the bird stays in the tree. And now the boy, who is what we're talking about, goes off to see the sights. So that is the function of this ni here, is to drag your attention to the boy and make it clear that from this point on, the story is about him and we're not going to worry about the bird right now. Okay. In Hyo, a South Central or Southern Chin language from Chittagong, again, we have this ni. Now Zakaria in his grammar glosses this as focus. And I'm pointing this out because as far as I'm concerned, I think this is doing exactly the same thing in Hyo as it is in classical Tibetan. But for now, I'm going to go with the author's glosses for this. So this is from a hunting story. They're out wandering around in the woods and they're looking at this game and that game, and there was a deer and there was a wild pig. And now at this point they decided, okay, nuts to the deer, we're going to go follow the wild pig again. So as you see, this ni is doing exactly the same thing that we just saw it doing in classical Tibetan. So in Pumai, an Angami Pachuri language from Manipur, we get the same thing. That's the same ni. And PT is Sahini's gloss for this, and I think it is particular topic. Anyway, he has his own gloss for it. But once again, what we've got here is a conversation between a young man and his father, and the ni is being used to say, okay, so father, was it you who were an adult first, or was it me? And the ni is doing what in English I'm doing with the contrastive stress. Was it you, neni, or was it me, ini? Okay, now we've got this in Tibetan, in Naga, in South Central. Already Tibetan and, South Central and Pumai might be closely related, but Tibetan's not. So this is something which seems to be showing up all over the family. And there are quite a number of other languages where the equivalent information structure is not ni, but something like na. And I strongly suspect in a case like Boro that this na is just a phonologically reduced version of ni. So this is out of Krishna's paper. This is a conversation. First speaker says, so where's the money going to come from? And the next speaker says, it'll come from Banubabu. N. Right? So here the contrast is with not with somebody else. The contrast is kind of with nobody, right? Kind of the implication of this first sentence is, there's no money, how are we going to do this? And this is, yeah, there is money, it's Banubabu, that's where it comes from. So this thing is, again, all over the family. And here's an example, or some examples of it all over the family. So we find it in Lola-Burmese languages. We find it in Changik languages. We've seen it in Kukichin and some Naga languages, and in Bodogaro, and in Tibetan, and in Kiranti. And I wish I had another slide to show you. Just a couple of days ago, David Peterson, noticing my title for this conference, sent me an old 20-year-old handout from a paper he gave long ago, in which he's basically suggesting, so if we look at the Kukichin languages, a lot of them have an ergative marker that looks something like ni or na or in. And Peterson is arguing that that is a further grammaticalization of this topic marker. And I just got this a couple of days ago, and I didn't have time to include some slides to show you how this works. But the story is basically this. In any Tibeto-Burman language, we have 0 anaphora, or what in your syntax classes they call radical prodrop. Meaning, if you know who I'm talking about, I don't have to have any noun phrase or any pronoun or anything there. And as Peterson points out, when you're telling a story, usually you introduce a new character in an intransitive clause before you have them do anything, right? So you don't say, I was in the park and a man came over, or you don't say, I was in the park and a man talked to me. You say, I was in the park and a man came over and talked to me. So the man is present there in the intransitive sentence. He's not there in the transitive sentence. And so, David says, the only time you actually have a transitive subject is when it's contrastive. So it would naturally be marked with a contrastive marker. And in the languages where we find this functioning as an ergative, that simply means that it has been reinterpreted from being a contrastive marker to being an ergative marker. I thought I saw someone had a hand up, and I was in the middle of something. Is there a question? Okay, we can save that for later then. And move on to the strangest part of this whole story, how ni interacts with negative marking. And an interesting paper to look at just came out a few years ago by Johan van der Aure and Frans Vossen. This is the citation for it if you want, but what's cool about this is in the Kiranti languages, for anybody who's wondering what's Kiranti, these are languages of Eastern Nepal and Sikkim. In the group as a whole, there are 2 different negative morphemes. A lot of languages have the prefix ma, which is the original Proto-Trans-Himalayan negative marker. And a lot of them also have a suffix ni, which is a negative, which you really only find as a negative in Kiranti languages. Now, what's actually interesting is that most of the languages have both of these. So in Melahang, for example, you get ma in a non-past sentence, but you get ni as the negative marker in a past tense sentence. Or so, no, in a non, how's this work? Yes, you get the ma in a past tense and the ni in a non-past. That's important, we'll get back to that. So we know where the ma comes from. This is the original negative. We find this even in Chinese. This goes all the way back to the original language. Question is, where does this ni come from as a negative marker? Notice some interesting things about it. The old ma negative is a prefix, like it has always been since the very beginning. The new negative comes after the verb. And notice this is in exactly the same position as all of those other knees we've been seeing coming at the ends of sentences, right? The copula knee comes at the end of a sentence because these are verb final languages. The sentence final marker comes at the end of a sentence, and so on. Okay, now the knee we find in most of the Kiranti languages, not in all of them, but usually only in the non-past tense. And if we do find it in the past tense, it's because it's the only negative. So I said most, but not all Kiranti languages. There are a few Kiranti languages, I think, where we only have ni and no longer ma, and there we get the ni everywhere. But wherever there's any division, ma is past tense and ni is non-past tense. Okay, I just said that, but here it is all written down if you want to have a look. Okay, so the implication here is that in Proto-Kiranti, ma somehow went with past tense verb forms and ni somehow went with non-past, and that where that's no longer clear, it's because one or the other has spread. Okay, let's go back here a minute. That's kind of weird. And we kind of wonder why that would happen. And my immediate hypothesis is that this has something to do with the copula only because the copula is available. But this is also Van der Aura and Vossen's hypothesis. They reconstruct this as the copula, saying, look, Kiranti is just about the only Tibeto-Burman branch in this area where there's no evidence at all for ni as a copula. What happened to it? Well, maybe it's here. But then the question arises, how would that happen? Why would that happen? How does a copula magically turn into a negative marker? Well, I'll show you. But first, let's note that we have a similar problem in the South Central Kuki-Chin languages. Actually, this really isn't the one I want to look at. We look here, and we look at, in Monsang, in the, I missed, these are affirmative and negative future paradigms in Monsang. Okay, we find this na pretty much in the future negative. Notice in the affirmative future, it's not there. And in the past negative, it's not there. And usually the negative marker is this ma. Okay. Now notice that this ma comes after the verb. Remember that the ma is a prefix, which means that what comes after it used to be an auxiliary verb. So it looks here like we have a negated verb. What would that verb be? Well, it might be a copula ni, especially since the schwa in Monsang is the regular reflex of e. So it looks like for some reason, the language hasn't gone as far as Kiranti has. Basically, the Kiranti languages got to this point and then just dropped out the ma because it was redundant, because this na is already telling you that this is negative. And so they just stopped using the ma. Monsang and South Central languages haven't gone that far yet. Still, there is some kind of special association with negation in both Kiranti and South Central. Now, there's no special genetic relation between these two groups. Kiranti languages are Western, South Central languages are Central. So this seems to go really deep. What could it be? What is the association between this copula and negation? What is the coincidence? Is there some, I keep saying this. You should probably be getting bored by it by now. Well, maybe not so mysterious. Let's go back to talking about the basic functions of copulas again and think again about, say, a Dimasa example. All right, so we've already seen that in an affirmative sentence, we only get the negator, we only get the copula for emphasis or contrast. But in a negative sentence, the copula is always there because you need the copula to attach the negative marker to. And this is characteristic across Tibeto-Burman languages. What that means is that in ordinary Dimasa, if you're just wandering around listening to the language, most of the time that you hear somebody say the copula, it will be in a negative sentence. And I want to suggest that this is the origin of the association between the copula and negation. Right. Now, an interesting further development in Atong, another Bodhgara language, and therefore pretty closely related to Dimasa, the ni is the negative copula. So there's an affirmative copula, tong, and there's a negative copula, ni. And it just means not present all by itself. It doesn't need any kind of a negator. Well, I'm sure that this is the same ni that we have in Dimasa because these languages are so closely related and they have a copula ni. And I suggest that how we get to this point is simply that the copula becomes associated with negative sentences because it has to be there in a negative sentence. It usually isn't there in an affirmative sentence. And just over time, the copula takes on the negative force and we no longer need actual overt negative marking. This is just highlighting what I was just saying here. And indeed, there are a few other languages scattered around Tibeto-Burman where we find not exactly the same thing as Atong, but basically find that the only remnant of ni in the language has to be negated. In other words, that it only occurs with the negative. So in Dura, which is a Central Himalayan language related to Magar and Kham, and in Gashiza, which is a Gerongic language in Sichuan. So this is Dura over here, this is Gashiza over here. We can see they're not influencing each other or anything like that. If you want to say an affirmative equational sentence, the copula is ngo, but with a negative, it's nyo, which I'm sure comes from ni. But the nyo only goes with the negation, and the ngo only occurs without negation. Yeah. So what I think is this language replaced the old copula ni with a new copula, but kept the old one in the negative because presumably it had the same association with negation that we've seen that it had in Bodhgaro and Kiranti and Kukchin. Then in Dura, there are 4 different copulas. Le and Po are new developments within Central Himalayan. The Po and the P probably have something to do with each other. But we have Ni, it's a copula. Clearly it is our same copula Ni, but it only occurs under negation. So again, it seems like the same, here we can see it brightening up, the same association has had the same effect. Once again, just this negated form, which is the last remnant of Ni in the language. Something similar in Pusha. We're kind of getting to the end here. Maybe I can just skip through this. Basically, there is this nyo again, which you only use with the negative. Okay, so what I want to suggest in summary here, we've seen 3 grammaticalization paths that Ni has taken. It has become a sentence final marker. It has become a information structure marker, and it has become a negative marker. And I want to suggest that all 3 of these are predictable from the basic facts about the distribution of copulas in Tibeto-Burman languages, where typically the copula is obligatory in a negated sentence, but probably not present in an affirmative sentence. And if it is present in an affirmative sentence, it has contrastive force. And where it develops odd negative associations, that comes from its intrinsic association with negated sentences, where it has to be present in order to carry the negative morpheme. So that's the end. Thank you. So now let's see, do I need to unshare somehow?
Thank you, Professor Scott DeLancey, for the wonderful and insightful talk. So participants, we may have some questions, query, or clarification from Professor Scott. I open the session.
Yeah.
Please unmute yourself if you have any query, question, and you can directly interact with Sir Scott, sir. Please, anybody has any query, question? Yeah.
Can you say something?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please, sir. Please.
Scott?
Yes.
It's a very interesting and fascinating talk. You have developed it very well from taking so much data and analysis of different languages of the family. I would like you to see at some time the copula in Dravidian languages, and our negative comes from the Dravidian, B, where B is negated. There, of course, they are, what do you call them? They are not the same form, they look like. So, and our conditional marker is also coming from the verb be. The conditional marker coming from verb be eventually ends up as a focus marker, as a contrastive focus marker. So something like as for. So you would be, Peri Bhaskarrao has a paper on verb be in Foundations of Language in the 70s. And there may be some stuff by Asher and some stuff from Malayalam by Asher. So you might like to see sometime and see if you can see the kind of connections between the verb be as a negative marker, verb be used as a contrastive focus marker, etc., etc.
Yeah, the conditional, I mean, the information structure marker function presumably comes from a construction like it's his, that car, right? And then you can get from that to a conditional marker, like it's his, that car. If it's his, that car, and so on. So yeah, this is a very productive process. And as you say, a lot of people have worked on it before. My main point in this paper is not really so much, oh, look at all the things the copula can do, as look at how tracing this one morpheme ties together a whole lot of developments within Tibeto-Burman. Okay. So, sorry. There's another question. And
Sir,
yes,
some questions in the chat box, sir.
right. Someone is asking about, yes, and I completely left out talking about the copula as an auxiliary. Sort of because that's so obvious and happens all the time, right? This is kind of the basic, essential syntactic development in any Tibeto-Burman language. Tibeto-Burman languages are constantly reinventing their tense aspect morphology by nominalizing clauses and then sticking a copula after it. And all kinds of things develop out of this. You get new non-past forms, you get new tense forms, you get new modality forms, new evidentiality forms, whatever. But the basic construction is always nominalized clause and then a copula. So that's another route. That route usually brings the copula into tense aspect marking. And then it gets sucked into the verb paradigm sort of more completely than in the examples that I've been talking about. But yes, there are many, many examples of that as well. In fact, if we go back, thinking about the Monsang example that I gave, right, where we saw that ni showing up in the future only in the negative. Well, that was a tense aspect marker. It's just that it was a future marker that was restricted only to negative clauses. So yeah, I've only given you a sample. As both of the questioners are pointing out, this is a huge and amazingly complex topic to jump into. Okay, let's see, we got Mimi.
Yeah, Dr. Mimi, yeah, please.
Can you hear
Dr.
me?
Mimi, please unmute yourself. Please. Yeah.
Yes, I'm unmuted.
We hear you.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Scott, for that wonderful talk. I am a speaker of Angami, and you had mentioned ni as a particular marker in Angami. And I'm finding some difficulty in getting an example of ni with this function in the language.
Actually,
so I would like to know more about it. Yeah.
I mentioned it in Pumai. And I said simply that Pumai belongs to the Angami Puchuri group.
Oh, I see. Okay, all right.
But I wasn't speaking specifically about Angami itself.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, Sahini?
Okay.
Yeah, Sahini.
Can I also share something?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Scott, for the wonderful talk. I would like to share my experience while analyzing the ni marker especially in the noun phrase. I think we have the first ni is with when in an adjunctive construction. So we have the ni with the low tone with the subject. And also if we're just trying to say that among 2-3 possible subjects, if this is the particular person who killed it or who have done the action, then we use the mid-tone ni, which I have called it particular marker. So their contrastive marking is like we use yo, like John yo or puyo. So yo come when something we said in contrary to the previous statement. And we also have like more like emphatic or something which you have some, if I say John's, which means we have some sense of pittiness to the subject with some background of a sad thing or something like that. So, and also the knee marker, it comes with the instrumental marking, which is same form, knee. And also with the verb, it comes as a adverbial marker. So it was so confusing for several months to annotate them. Yeah, so
one of the things I agree. One thing that makes this sort of difficult is that I'm quite sure that there is at least one or two, maybe more, other morphemes floating around that have the same form. So we find genitive markers that are ni, and we find ablative markers that are ni, and as you say, instrumentals. And I'm not really sure that there's any path where I could get from the copula to an ablative marker. So I think that that's separate. I think that the ablative marker is something else. But there is a path we know where you can get from an ablative to an agent marker. So then when I find a language with a ni ergative marker, I don't know, did this come from the copula by David Peterson's pathway, or did it come from the ablative by some other pathway? And this is a major problem in trying to work out the histories of all of these languages. I don't have any kind of solution to suggest, except simply that the one thing we really, really need is more thorough, detailed descriptions, like Dr. Vejo's, Dr. Sahini's, where we have all of the precise details of how these different knees are used in different languages so that we can actually compare them and say, oh, no, this one really seems like it's more ablative or whatever. But yes, this is a wide open problem.
Regarding the negation, I think with the contrastive marker, with I label it because yo, yeah, it's like it's more consistently occurring with the negation marker. The yo.
Yes, well, Givan pointed out a long time ago, and people tend to still neglect this fact, that in ordinary human discourse, unlike in logic, for example, but in ordinary human discourse, a negated sentence is almost always contrastive. You don't ever say a negative sentence unless you have some suspicion that the person you're talking to believes otherwise. Why would I tell you something is not true unless I imagine that you might think it is true? Right? So there's this intrinsic contrastiveness to all negative statements across the world.
Thank you, sir, for the interesting talk.
So anybody has question, comments?
I think
Please.
Madhumita ma'am and Caroline madam, they have unmuted.
Okay.
Yeah,
Please, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
I would like to thank Professor Scott DeLancey. His talks are always very insightful, and I've been working on some languages of Arunachal Pradesh, so it would be very interesting to see what Sir has brought before us regarding the Pichin and the Borogaru group, if it has the same kind of, structure that is
If you
there.
find anything, please let me know.
Yes, sir, definitely. So it's really nice seeing you. And last time we met was in Tejpur University, I think. So, yeah.
Yes, and I had plans to come back very soon, and that didn't
We are
happen.
waiting for, I think so, when things are better, like...
When things are better, I will be seeing you all again, yes.
Yeah, sure. And it could be Tejpur University like we had planned. and
Good.
it didn't happen this time.
All right, well, I'm looking
Yes.
forward to it.
So,
Can I speak now? May I
Yes.
speak now?
yes, yes.
Yes, please. Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for DeLancey. I thank you a great deal. I have heard about you, and but I have never read any one of your books. Now today, it's a surprise of surprises. I come across this word Niwa. Niwa here. Atong is very close to us, and we are from the same family. Garo, Atong, Awen, Abeng, Matabeng, all of them. Now, we do not have the equivalent of Niwa in the variety that we speak. So I know this word Niwa, but I never used to wonder how this particular word came into, we don't have it, but why the Atongs have it. I never questioned it. Now that you mention it, now the secret behind it is like, it's a new discovery for me, epiphany. It's a new discovery for me. Of course, we also have NE, Ne, NE. We have so many, we use it in so many ways, but I don't know whether it is really connected to an I, Ni. I always used to think of it as a suffix to verb. And we use this Ne as a question marker, and sometimes for emphasis, sometimes for contrast. But
Well,
I'm not sure.
Sounds very likely.
Perhaps. Okay, we'll just have to like probe into it.
Absolutely, please do. We would really like to know that information.
Thank you. I just have to get more thing and talk. I have to talk with people and then see whether my ideas are correct or not. Thank you so much.
Find out, let me know.
All right. Yeah, I'll let you know. Thank you so much.
So there are
Thank you,
questions in
everyone.
the chat box.
Yeah. This chat box.
Yes, there are plenty of questions. I think from Tangi Changte, ma'am, and I think
One is Anindita.
Yes.
Yeah, I just threw in the tidbit for Scott from Mizo. You
please
won't find this in the text, and so I've written out that sort of Ania just means it is. Is the person, agreement. Ni is the copula, and the last is a non-final particle. And often in the speech, it's usually shortened to, instead of Ania, people often say Ania. Now, then the last one I put is Nia. You'll find this, you won't find this in the text, but in the conversation, usually in the context, after the end of the conversation, which means like, well, if you say so, or I really don't agree with you. It's a polite way of saying it. Yeah.
Perfect.
And I think it comes from Ania. So that's what the formula means.
Yes.
So you just say Nia, it means, well, if you say so, but.
So here we have our old Ni wandering down another little path, off into a little corner and staying there. That's nifty.
Yeah.
There is a question, Dhiren sir, by Anindita. Yeah. Maybe you can address
Anindita,
it.
Yeah. Yes. Sir, there is a question in the chat box by Anindita.
I'll tell you. See, I already talked about that. Was what I started out with.
Okay.
May I say something?
Yes, sure.
Yeah. So, thank you, Professor Scott. It's a wonderful presentation. So you have already discussed about the auxiliary marker, but would you say a couple of things about how copula works as a focus marker also in the sentence initial position? At least in some of the Indo-Aryan languages, we see it has, kind of been moved to the sentence initial position, where we see a lot of emphasis being given on the proposition. Yeah.
Okay.
So maybe
The
a bit of
idea
discussion.
here is that a copula turns into a focus marker through the medium of a cleft construction, right? So in English, where we say things like, no, it's downhill that's difficult.
No, it does work as cleft in English. Let's say,
Right. And so there you're getting that copula, it's, which is basically a contrast marker. It's marking downhill as being in contrast to whatever it is you were thinking about that I'm now correcting.
yeah.
And so the idea is that where knee, for example, or some other copula turns up as a focus marker, it's through that same path. Of course, since these are Tibeto-Burman languages and they're pro-drop, there's no it,
Okay.
right? So
Yeah.
the sentence doesn't come out, oh, it's John you have to talk to. It comes out, John is you talk to. And so then that is right there at the end of a noun phrase, which is where we see it as a focus marker.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that, Professor Scott. Yeah.
I also want to make a remark regarding
Okay, Manali. Okay.
yes, one of the dialects of Dimasa, the Dijua dialect, is spoken in Karbi Anglong and Dimapur district in Nagaland. They use the ni after the nia and also after nidu, like as in like this car nia ni. So the ni again comes after that. So that is we don't have ni as a quotative marker in Hashau and Hawar, but it is there in I think Jemra and Dijua dialect. So that was something that I just noticed. And in Hashau we have it as ne. It occurs as ne for the second-hand information, but in Dijua it occurs as ni again, even if it's nidu and ni is added again to specify further that.
That's very
I can
interesting.
give the examples to you by mail to make it.
Please do. I would love to see that.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Manali, for the information. And if anybody has question, because we have to. Okay, yes, please. That might come.
Oh, sir. Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to give example in Liang Mei regarding a knee particle. Actually, I use it as I have mentioned it as a particle in one of my paper. I don't know whether it has a relation with the knee that we're talking about now, but I just wanted to say that the knee in Liang Mei is used as a particle to express desire or wish, as opposed to the negation that we have seen in the other examples in Tibeto-Burman that we have seen in the talk. But in Liang Mei, ni is used in a, I would say in an affirmative way. We have a negative counterpart for ni, that is rao. Rao is like I don't want to, and if we use ni, I want to or I wish to. When you say tat nie, I want to go. Tat tu nie, I want to eat. So we have ni in this form. Like the use of ni in Liang Mei in this way. I just wanted to
Okay, that's interesting. And offhand, I don't know what to say about it, but I'd be interested to know more.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Dimasa, for the information. If anybody has question, so please unmute yourself and you can talk to Scott, sir, or you can interact, please. Otherwise, okay, we'll be closing the session.
Well, it's
If
getting
anybody
late
has
for you
question,
folks, isn't it?
I think so. There is no more question.
All right.
So I'm really interesting listen to Scott, sir, and I don't have to say more because I enjoyed the talk and we learned a lot from his talk. That's all, and we expect he should come to the Northeast once after the pandemic is over. So we're really want him to be here, okay, in the Northeast India. And I request Dr. Bijan to give a lot of thanks to our pioneer speaker, Professor Scott DeLancey. Yeah, Bijan, over to you.
Thank you, sir, for the opportunity. I would like to thank Professor Scott DeLancey for such a wonderful and insightful presentation. We learned many things, sir, from your presentation. The presentation was full of information that I think at the same time it benefits my friends who are participating to today's talk. Thank you, sir, for your talk. And I would like to thank all the participants who made this session very lively and very fruitful, and for your valuable inputs also. At the same time, we are really indebted to you. So that's what I can share. So the word that I can share with all you, that thank you very much for being a part of this session.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you,
Professor DeLancey.
One announcement, since Sir Scott DeLancey is with us, so may I request everyone to open your video so that we can take one group photo, because we cannot meet together, so we can have all of us together one group photo.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, and we will see you tomorrow morning at 9:30 for the session of Phonology 2. And thank you so much, Sir Scott, for being here with us.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Bye-bye. Good night.
Bye.
Next time in India.
Thank you, everyone. And